really interested me to learn about like how you dealt with burnout and that whole thing going through, obviously you went through those residency years.
Intern year was the 80-hour work week.
Yeah.
Like it was the first year of the that set of laws. There was another set of laws in 2011 that actually prompted my massive burnout, but as an attending, because of how it shifted what we did.
Hi there, that was our guest for today. I just thought I'd throw a little snippet in there. You are listening to the Air Hug Community Podcast. So welcome if it's your first time. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us again. This podcast is targeted at midlife women. We talk about all the things that happen, the good, the bad, the ugly, all the emotions, and how we respond to it all. So I'm glad you're here. Thank you for joining us. Let's go. Hello, everybody. Welcome and welcome back. If it's not your first time to the Air Hug Community Podcast. Our guest today is Dr. Jill Wener, and she is in the state of Georgia, the only instructor for conscious health meditation. And Jill, after having a 10-year career in internal medicine, suffered some burnout, and she was introduced, and I'm going to let her get into that, to conscious health meditation. And of course, she was skeptical, not surprisingly, being an MD, right? She sought out to learn the science behind it and embraced it and marveled at her results. So I'm super excited. I want to hear this story. So Dr. Jill, thank you so much for joining us today. And I guess let's just start right there. How did you go from being introduced and being skeptic to thinking like maybe this is a good idea to becoming an instructor?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a really, there's multiple different levels of this story. So I'll give you the like medium amount of detail and then you can probe for more if you want. And I'm always happy to share. I was like your stereotypical type A anxious doctor. Never thought myself as spiritual, never was a meditator. I had tried yoga a few times, but other than that, I was not at all interested in meditation. I got really burnt out in 2011, which is about 5 years after my residency. And I was just decimated. I was crying every day and just had no ability to tolerate anything unexpected. I was unable to tolerate it. And around that time, I met someone who meditated twice a day. And I was like, I need to know everything. Tell me all the things. And they were like, well, my teacher's coming to Chicago in a couple of days. Why don't you go hear him speak? So I went to go hear this guy speak. And it was kind of like his spiel, his like sales pitch to take the meditation course, which is taught like 4 days in a row, a couple hours each night. So I was like, I had no idea what I was walking into. I did no research. And I just walked in and this guy was speaking about stress in the body and like the state of being when you're in that stress mode all the time. And I just remember thinking, how does he know exactly how I'm feeling? And everything he said resonated medically. So I just felt like he's smart. He knows what he's talking about. He doesn't seem totally like he doesn't seem like he's trying to like take advantage of me, I guess, or take my
Yeah,
money.
he's not trying to sell you a bill of goods.
Exactly. And so I signed up and I was literally like, I want my mantra yesterday. Like I want this. I just like knew that it was what I needed to do. And so I signed up for the course, and within 2 days, I'm meditating twice a day for 20 minutes really easily. And the meditation practice was amazing. And in a few months, my burnout was gone. Now for me, like that is what helped my burnout, but it doesn't help everybody. Like it's not like meditation is the answer for everyone's burnout. It can help everybody in their burnout journey. For me, it was mostly all that I needed. And I just felt great. And I had a successful career doing faculty development and teaching med students and residents and seeing patients. And then after a few years, I had my teacher, Ashley, said, have you ever thought about becoming a teacher? And I was like, no, are you joking me? I'm a doctor. Like, that's what I do. And so I sort of thought, okay, I'll go. My teacher training is 3 months in India. So I thought I'll go do that. And then I'll come back to Chicago and practice hospital medicine part of the time and teach meditation part of the time, because I was like happy enough in my job, but I started to just get the sense that there was something else for me. Like I wanted a shift or a big change in my paradigm at that point. That was like, I would move to a different state and practice medicine there. It was never like leave medicine. And I had the opportunity to move to China before I went to India. And I was like, well, you know what? Life's too short. Let's do this. So that was kind of, I didn't know that was the big thing that I was gonna do. So I left my job to move to China. And then I went to India for 3 months. And then I ended up coming back to Atlanta, which is where I grew up. And after having been out for 6 months or so, realized I did not want to go back.
So you didn't miss it?
Didn't miss it. What I missed was like connecting with people, teaching and making people feel better. And I got to still do that with teaching meditation. And I did realize, like, once I was out, that there was this whole, even though I was happy in my practice, there was this whole other level of like a constant, like a pressure of stress and responsibility on me as a physician that I didn't even know. Like, it was just a part of everyday life. Even if I'd be on vacation or whatever, like that was always there as that responsibility. And having that lifted was like a huge relief and a breath of fresh air. And so I just decided not to go back. I had a skill. I think a lot of people feel, particularly physicians or other professionals who have gone through such intensive training, that like, that's all I can do. That's all I know how to do. I've put so much time and
so much
money
investment, time,
into
money.
it. Like, how would I do anything else? A lot of people have a lot of debt, which I still had some at that point. And I just was like, I actually have a skill now. Like, there's actually, I felt like finally confident that there was something else I could do other than practice medicine, and just kind of decided, all right, that's what I'm doing now. And that's kind of the beginning of that new aspect of my career.
Yeah. Did you feel like such a big career switch? I'm just wondering if you felt like a pull, like you like this is what you're, I don't want to say supposed to, but this was going to be your next chapter.
Yeah. I mean, it felt like, when I was in college, I decided to major in religion, but I was pre-med, and I was like, I'm going to medical school. That's just what's happening. And I hadn't applied, I hadn't gotten in, but I just kind of felt like that's what I'm doing. So I'll choose an interesting, exciting major that's totally unrelated because I want to have this experience. But I always just kind of knew, like, this is where I'm going. And I came back and I was like, yeah, now I'm teaching meditation. Like, it just felt like, of course it's going to work. Like, it just kind of seemed like the next right step. And it does seem like a huge leap, but it all happened in very small increments. So it just was like saying yes to lots of things that felt like the right thing to do. Ending up I mean, I thought I was going to be, at the beginning of it, teaching meditation and practicing medicine. And then I was like, okay, I'll be teaching meditation in China. And then I didn't go back to China. And then it was like, okay, now I'm just going to be teaching meditation in Atlanta. And that, so just even that part of it evolved.
Little decisions. Yeah.
And there was a bit of a sense, I did hear from a lot of people, oh, it's such a shame that you wasted all that time. And now, but like, training in medicine and practicing medicine, but like, I don't see it as a waste of time, because it formed who I am, and it formed my understanding of the healthcare system, so that I can then reach people in healthcare who might not otherwise be open to something like meditation, like me, like how I was.
Yeah.
And maybe they'll hear it from me where they wouldn't hear it from someone else. And so I don't feel like that time was wasted at all. I feel like it's exactly where I was supposed to be. And I've even, there are other things that I do now in addition to meditation. And I don't feel like, oh, all that meditation work were not worthwhile, because that informs the work I do in other spaces as well. So it all kind of is a continuum, I think.
It's amazing. I think it is too. And right there is a lesson I always feel like we're always where we're supposed to be. And it doesn't really matter if it makes sense to anyone else. Maybe it doesn't even matter if it makes sense to us, if it feels right. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So I would like to talk about how meditation helped you, because you wrote an article in what was it called? Kevin MD.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was the first time I saw a reference to that on your website, and I'm like, what is Kevin MD? So let's start with that.
Yeah. Kevin MD is like a medical blog. This guy named Kevin, I'm forgetting his last name, but Kevin, he was talked a lot about burnout, had a lot of articles about burnout, and then became like started this whole blog. And now he's a very well-known speaker and has a podcast and everything. So you can submit articles to be published. So I have submitted, I've had several of them published on his blog, but a couple of them have been about meditation. So
Yeah,
it's kind of cool to have that forum, I guess, to reach other people.
that's pretty interesting. And so I think I mean, I don't know if we have any medical professionals in the audience, but if you're a skeptical medical professional, it might have some weight, even just having you, with you're an MD, So anyways, I was very interested. I was reading when you talked about how meditation helped you, you talked about regaining compassion and empathy. Can we just talk about that for a minute?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, when we're burnt out, when anyone is burnt out, or at least my experience of it, and as a physician, it's sort of the same no matter what you do. If you're having to like show up and give of yourself in any capacity and you're burnt out, it feels almost impossible to show up and give of yourself. And I felt like I resented my patients, I resented my trainees for requiring time and attention from me. I wanted to love all of it and I wanted to be there for them, but I was like, and I did it, but only out of a sense of obligation and not wanting to be like amoral, like I did. I continued really good patient care and I and continued to teach, but it just felt exhausting and it felt like I had nothing to give. And also like, so that, I guess that's kind of where I was at with the burnout. And then once I learned to meditate, it kind of, I always joke that it like helped me get out of my Jill bubble. Even before burnout, we're all kind of wrapped up in our own world. I feel like we all see the world through our own lens. I
Yeah.
don't know if I was particularly like that, but I was definitely like that. And the meditation helped me to get out of my own shoes and to relate to other people better and to actually, I think there's a dehumanization that happens in medical training and maybe also worsening with burnout. And it sort of rehumanized everything. It rehumanized the patients I was working with, my colleagues, my trainees, and it just helped me understand like just because I want it for them or think it should be this way doesn't mean that that's actually what they want or what should actually happen. Doesn't mean that I'm right. It's just, so it helped me kind of get outside of that and start to connect on a deeper level, not just getting back to where I was before burnout, but really shifting and revolutionizing the way that I connected with people.
Yeah, that's amazing. In fact, you wrote something. Let me see if I can find it. This is a quote from you, and I do that. And it just
Sure, of
reminded
course.
me. Yeah, you said, I learned that I didn't always have the right answers, and that you shouldn't have the right answers, and that when these things went against expectations, they often turned out for the better.
Yeah. That's so funny. I'm still not used to being quoted myself, quoting myself to myself. But yeah. So one of the things that really, really helped, that meditation helped me in terms of my burnout is I don't think I realized how tightly I was trying to control everything
Mm,
and how, because there's a lot of spinning plates, like as it's inpatient and outpatient. I was in the inpatient setting, but we have to coordinate testing and we have to get orders written for tests and for medicines and for procedures and get a discharge going and communicate with doctors and family. Like there's just so many plates going
hmm
in all this pressure of you have to get the patient discharged quickly and we don't want to do unnecessary, like there's just all these other like factors. It's like you're orchestrating this whole event.
Yeah.
And so I would feel super attached to a patient needs to get their CAT scan today. It has to be today. Or if the result wasn't what I wanted, or if my students didn't do what I thought they should have done in the time that I should have done it. And I was trying to force all this stuff, like all these pieces together. and it was exhausting. And I didn't realize what a control freak I was until I started to have a little bit more of a sense, an ever increasing sense of trust in the way things work out. And knowing that I don't have all the answers. I'm not supposed to have all the answers. And that most of the time I started to see like bigger picture. If something happened that wasn't what I thought should happen, like a patient didn't get discharged, they'd have a fever overnight or something. And it would be like, well, they would have gotten sicker wherever they were going and had to come back to the hospital. So it was good that they were still here. There'd always be something where it was like, it worked out better the way that it happened, even though the way that it happened wasn't what I wanted or thought should happen. And every single time it was just like so refreshing to keep getting consistent evidence that I should let go and that it was safe to do that and that I can bring my best. And that doesn't mean I have to like force things to happen. And it was such a relief for me. I think everyone I interacted with could feel that energy shift as well. And it doesn't, I think sometimes we can say everything is the way it's supposed to be, and it can be a little like not allowing space for us to feel negative emotions when they come up. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to be promoting like, oh, that sucks. You got fired. That's okay. Everything's going to work out great. You're supposed to be fired. Like, you'll have new opportunities. Like, yes, maybe. But also it's okay to be really bummed out that you're fired.
Can we just be pissed for a while? Yeah.
And so I think that mindset of like everything's happening exactly as it should is really helpful. And it can also turn a little bit toxic if we don't leave space for mistakes and emotions of all sorts. So I think I've kind of shifted a little bit back towards the center on that of like, yes, everything happens for a reason. And yeah, sure, it's okay to be frustrated, and sure, it's okay but it doesn't mean it's like an insult on my own, like, worthiness as a human if this patient didn't get discharged. It's like I was basing so much of my own well-being and purpose and enoughness on those little things that I had really no control over.
And the thing with being a physician is people expect you, at least coming from my point of view and growing up, you expect your doctor to control outcomes, and they can't.
Yeah.
You can't, nobody can control outcomes all the time, but we go to doctors because we want them to give us the outcome we want. And so there has to be an awful lot of pressure,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So it was a tangible relief, like release of control that really made things so much better for me as I continued to practice, between 2011 when I learned to meditate and started feeling better, in 2015 when I ultimately moved to China and left my job. Like, that mindset kept me happy in my job. Like, it kept me enjoying it.
Wow, that's amazing. In fact, that was going to be my next question, and we just kind of actually evolved right into it, was letting go of that need to control and getting more enjoyment out of not needing to control. It's just so amazing. So now your full-time meditation, tell me.
No. So now I do. So I'm a meditation teacher. I teach the live course that I took in 2011. I teach that. Oh. I also have an online course where people can it's like a pre-recorded on-demand kind of thing where people can sign up for that course and learn how to meditate without directly interacting with me. So I do that. And in the meditation space, also, I host retreats for women in healthcare, and not just physicians, but any type of healthcare. I host those retreats once or twice a year at a fancy spa. And then in addition to that, I'm an EFT tapping practitioner, which is, I think maybe we'll talk about that more in the future, but that's another really great stress reduction modality. I'm a firm believer that there's not one thing that's going to help, that's going to solve all of our problems. And I used to have this notion, I need to be fixed. And if I just meditated enough, I'd be fixed. I now believe that we don't need to be fixed. We're perfect and wonderful exactly as we are. And there are many tools we can use to change the way we feel in the world and are in the world. And so tapping for me got a lot of the nooks and crannies that meditation didn't get, because meditation was wonderful and life-changing, but it didn't address everything that I felt like I wanted to change in my life. And so that's a technique that I use with one-on-one with clients. I do group programs. I teach people how to do tapping. So that's another part that I do. And then I also do a lot of work in the social justice, anti-racism, DEI space, using all of the meditation and the tapping and all the other mind body tools to help teach people tools to do this work that can be quite uncomfortable. Is almost by definition very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Teaching people how to do that work, to develop emotional intelligence and resilience and self-care, like for people who are on the receiving end of racism or other marginalization. That's a lot of stress and discomfort on the received, on the lived experience end. So these tools work for all identities. And I have a partner that I work with in that space, Dr. Maisha Claiborne. She's my partner in the anti-racism and DEI space. So I kind of do a lot of different things, and the meditation is like the basis of all of it. It's sort of the groundwork for that informs everything else that I've continued to do and evolve into.
That is fascinating. And how did you get down that, like, how did your journey go that way towards anti-racism? I'm just curious.
Yeah, great question. So it really started in 2016. I wrote a blog post after the election that I was told by a colleague or an acquaintance that my blog post was privileged. And I did not know what that meant. And I got very defensive and, but like saw through my defensiveness and was like, I don't really know what is privilege. I'm not racist. All these things, but I was like, I don't want to be whatever she's saying I am. So like, let me learn, let me start to read more and learn. So that's when I sort of opened my eyes that even as like a well-intending progressive white person, I did not know anything. Like there was so much that I had to learn about my own identity and my own, whiteness. And I'm Jewish also. So kind of how my Jewish identity played into that. And so that was just kind of like my own personal work. And then in 2019, I attended a training for allies called the Allies in Action, and led by Leslie Mack and Paige Ingram. And that was where you kind of develop a project. And that was where I first kind of came up with the idea of, let me do some of the emotional labor that we don't want to be asking people of color to do. Let me take some of that on and teach white people skills to like deal with their crap. Like when we have the realization of, oh my God, I have done all these things wrong. I have been living in this system and benefiting from it and all of it. It's a slap in the face, and it can feel like, oh my God, and it can be overwhelming and intimidating and make us defensive. And so initially it was like, let me use some of these tools to help white people learn. And then that expanded. Maisha joined me in early 2020, and that expanded to not just teaching white people, but to teaching people of all identities. Maisha's got a bunch of wonderful skills. She's also a physician, but has a lot of other skills that she brings to our curriculum. And that's kind of like the beginning of it. And, we kind of went from there.
It is fascinating. And it's amazing that really a blog post and someone's response to it ended up taking you in a whole different direction, or kind of the same direction with a different population, I guess, or a different viewpoint.
Yeah, it's like to a bigger, like for a bigger purpose, I think, because I think a lot of times self-care is important, and it can also keep us contained in our own little bubble, and to use the tools that we use for self-care, not only for us to feel better, but to change the way we relate to the rest of the world and see our interaction with it. I think that's really like the power of it is how that can make, like when we're outward facing, what that work can create for us.
It's just, that fascinates me. I want to go back just to a second to conscious health meditation. When you were
Yeah.
learning about it and when you were first exposed to it and a skeptic, and then you learned about the science behind it, like,
Yeah.
what should we know to know, like, how can you convince me that it's not like, what's the word I want to say? Woo woo. I don't know. I can't think of another word. But
The word is
how are
very,
you gonna, how are you, what is the science that lay people who are skeptical may grasp onto, to like, I don't want to sit there for 20 minutes twice a day. Where's the science behind it that tells me I'm going to benefit from giving up that time?
yeah, absolutely. So I'll like address that. I think it's going to be three parts. The first part is the meditation itself. When you do it, it is very, very different from mindfulness and other types of meditation where you're focusing and concentrating. So it is very, very easy to do 20 minutes twice a day. So it like feels good because you're not using effort. It's more like daydreaming rather than sitting and concentrating, and you sit comfortably with your back supported. So that right off the bat, it feels good to do. And there's not like a learning curve where you have to like ramp up like 2 minutes once a day and then twice a day and then 3 minutes and then six. Like right away, you're at 20 minutes twice a day and it's easy to do. So then like all of the stuff that comes with it is like, it's like icing on the cake. Like all the science behind it feels really good to do and the benefits come quickly. And it also happens to have science behind it that I really agree with. So in that way, in terms of spending our time doing it, it's it's a lovely practice. It's very simple. Now there's two ways I think that the scientific evidence helps me understand it and explain it to people. The first is the amount of rest that we get. It's a very, very restful practice. It
Mm.
takes our body to like a fourth state of consciousness that is called transcendence, or whatever we want to call it. It's actually a measurable state of consciousness that is not waking, it's not sleeping, it's not dreaming, that is more restful than sleep. So our body is getting a deep amount of rest. We're actually activating the parasympathetic nervous system, which I'm sure you talk about in all of your work.
Mhm.
But for anyone listening who doesn't know what that is, the fight or flight stress part of our body's nervous system is the sympathetic nervous system. And that has a huge role in our lives to keep us like going and active and able to deal with emergencies. The parasympathetic nervous system is the like healing, restful, like digestion, like all the things that we like, relaxing,
Recharge.
recharging. That's all parasympathetic nervous system. So we are activating the parasympathetic nervous system with this practice, which is taking our body to very deep states of rest, which is allowing us to kind of reset. It's like defragging a computer. So physiologically, you can measure what is happening, what's changing in the body. Heart rate drops, respiratory rate drops, all these different chemicals change in our body when we're doing this meditation practice. So that's one thing, is like activating parasympathetic nervous system. The other thing that it's funny because I love it when like all the different things in my life converge and like support each other. I mean, I also
Mhm.
like to learn new things, but it's, when I learned this meditation practice it's an ancient Indian practice that I learned from, uh, I learned to teach from a person who is not Indian, but spent a lot of time in India. And it's sort of like you're learning about the spiritual side of it. And we learn that there's stress that's released from our body and that we have these stress scars. And every time we have a stress reaction, it like lands in our body. And that when we meditate, it's actually healing that. But like, I sort of just took that for granted. And I was like, I had enough experiences with the meditation where I was like, okay, I can see that that's happening. But then I learned, I do a lot of work in trauma as well. Tapping is really great for trauma. And then, of course, that comes up in anti-racism work. But like, trauma lands in our body. Like trauma is an embodied experience that we carry with us all the time. And we have the way to heal from trauma. One of the ways to heal is to release it from our physical bodies. So for a very
Mhm.
long time, I was trying to explain it in a way that didn't sound woo woo, like you're saying. But then I'm learning all about trauma and I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like it's not BS. Like what I learned is actually it's in a different context and using different language, but it's all the same thing. So basically, whenever we have a stress reaction or something more significant, like that we would consider to be traumatic, we have a cellular memory of that in our body that we carry around with us. We also carry that from previous generations. And for anyone who is into this or believes this, possibly from past lives as well. But we'll stick right now with previous generations. It's called epigenetics. And it's a thing, like it's scientifically proven. So we're carrying around all this trauma in our body, and it's kind of putting us on hyperdrive to like make sure that doesn't happen again. So if I have a cellular memory of a song that I heard during a breakup being sad for me because it reminds me of the breakup, and I'm crying because I hear a song on the radio, I'm carrying that around with me in my body. So we have all these memories of these moments in our lives that were stressful. And whenever we're re-exposed to them, they can kind of set off another stress or trauma reaction. But it's that vigilance that we develop because we're always kind of looking out to like the stress center of our brain, it's the hippocampus and amygdala. That part of our brain is looking to protect us at all times. The hippocampus does not know the past from the present. So it's like that thing that happened 10 years ago, it's like, it just happened. We have to make sure it doesn't happen again right now and right now and right now. So everything we've ever experienced in our lives is like, we're actively trying to prevent that from happening again in the present. And it's just draining our energy. I call it adaptation energy in the meditation practice, but it's just like draining our resources, our internal resources, physical and emotional. And then that puts us off into like a stress mode again, because then we're not,
it's like we're reliving it. Is it like Groundhog Day?
We're reliving it, but also we're like trying to prevent it. We're like always looking to make sure it's not going to happen again. So we're like on some level of like alertness, trying to make sure that we're staying safe. It's really a beautiful way that the nervous system works, because if you hear a snapping sound in the woods and then you got bitten by a bear, every time you hear that snapping sound moving forward, you're going to want to protect yourself from the bear. But what happens is the stress center of our brain doesn't know the difference between life-threatening and not life-threatening. So it's just like the physiologic reaction of stress, the fight or flight response is the same if it was someone cutting you off in traffic or your kid, making a mess. None of, like those things aren't necessarily life-threatening, but they set off the same process inside our bodies. So the cool thing is with the meditation, when we get to this state of deep rest, that actually starts to release from our body, the stress that we carry around in our body, it starts to release that. And it allows like a deeper inner healing process that provides these really great longer term benefits, because it's not just relaxing in the 20 minutes that you're meditating twice a day, but it's actually doing work behind the scenes during the meditation to clear out those stresses so that they're no longer in our body causing us emotional and physical distress. So
that's amazing.
I hope that made sense, because it's usually like a much longer explanation that I go through. So it's not only activating the parasympathetic nervous system, but it's a somatic, it's healing. Somatic is like in the body. It is healing these traumas and stresses that we've been carrying around. Things from like stubbing our toe and getting, punished by our parents and having a temper tantrum when we were kids. Even that is stuff that we carry around with us. So it's not just whether you were in combat or you got, assaulted by somebody. It's all of the stresses that we've had in our life combined.
How many of you right now are thinking about all these little stresses that like, because I don't need to share them, but I'm like coming up with all these situations like, oh, these things do really still haunt us.
Yeah. And we're not aware of the majority of them. It's like the tip of the iceberg. The stuff we're aware of, but then there's all these other ones that are sort of happening in the background. If you think about a cell phone with all the apps on, it's kind of draining the battery, even if you're not using the app. Like it's that kind
running in the background.
Exactly.
Oh wow. Well, let's talk about your workshop. So that you have an online version and then you do a workshop for women in healthcare. What if they're not in healthcare?
So the ways to learn to meditate, this tradition, I call it conscious health meditation. It is also called Vedic meditation. And it's also very similar to transcendental meditation. If anyone listening has heard of that.
How do you spell Vedic?
VEDIC.
Okay. I just want to
So
make
Vedic
sure.
meditation is what I learned. That's the teacher training I went to, is a Vedic meditation teacher training.
Mm-hmm.
Like many meditation and yoga communities, it is a very problematic community with some problematic leaders who do problematic things. And I have extricated myself from that community, and I don't call it Vedic anymore because
Okay.
I am like taking a stand basically. And I'm like, I can take the wisdom and the knowledge, but not be part of like a toxic culture. So, I
Oh,
come up,
that's fascinating. Every
yeah,
community, right, has its good and
yeah.
bad. Okay.
Um, and I teach it the exact same way, but I've added a lot more of a like trauma informed, trauma responsive aspect to the way I teach,
Mm-hmm.
that I think is a lot more safe and beneficial for people who are learning this practice, because it's a very powerful practice. And if we're not prepared for that, and if we've all had trauma in our life, we've all lived through the last 2 years, so almost 3 years. So we've all had trauma. If we don't kind of reconcile a history of trauma with our spiritual practices or our self-care practices, it can actually be harmful. So I really take a lot of care in teaching that way. And I take all the guru culty stuff out of meditation. I really try to teach it in a very like transparent, authentic way. So if someone wanted to learn to meditate with me, they could come on one of my retreats. So you have to be a woman in healthcare, and I take that very liberally. So you could be a healthcare administrator, you could be a dentist, a nurse, a social worker, a therapist. So any kind of caring profession relating to people, basically, and their physical or emotional health. And then, and if you aren't one of those, currently I'm not offering retreats for non-healthcare people and people who aren't women, but who don't identify as women. But you can also go take my online course called the Rest Technique, and that is the adapted version of conscious health meditation to the online format. And that's pre-recorded. It's about 3 hours of video content, and that will get you, I designed that to be like all you need to know. is not everything
And
that I
get you
teach.
started. Yeah.
It's not a like secret trap lead in to take my live course. It's like designed to stand on its own. And then if people want to learn conscious health meditation, that's a 4-day process, 4 days in a row, 2 hours a day. It's a lot more time. It's a lot harder to like schedule and coordinate. I do teach that over Zoom, or for people who are in Atlanta, I teach that live in person as well. So that's a live course where we're like interacting directly. Or people can look for a Vedic meditation teacher in their community, just knowing that there are going to be some teachers in the community who are they're just going to, I think, fall into some of the same pitfalls that can happen in spiritual communities, that I try to work very hard to avoid that. I'm not perfect. There's lots of people who are going to teach you how to meditate very well. It's just the stuff that comes around the meditation that I have sort of adapted a little bit. So I think, did that answer your question?
Yeah, actually it did. And it is interesting because you're putting your own spin on it. So the people who resonate with you,
right,
are going to go to you. And if they resonate with someone else, they're going to go with someone else. Exactly. That's the way I'm interpreting it. And I think it's just amazing that at the time in your life when you needed it, you became aware of, from that, whatever person was that connected you with it was in Chicago, right? With that, to me, that is like, what a gift that was for you.
Yeah. And it found me like when I was ready. I was not ready for it. And then when I was completely just decimated at rock bottom with burnout, that's when I was open to it, because I wouldn't have been open otherwise. You don't have to be at rock bottom to like learn this type of meditation. And if you are at rock bottom, it can be very helpful.
I'm glad you pointed that out. Okay, so my question was, you talked about when you're meditating, you're not asleep and you're not awake, and you're kind of in, I want to call it a different dimension. You're in a different state of restfulness.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I'm getting too like wrapped up in like I'm kind of always worried about not sleeping enough. And so this is not going to replace sleep, but it's going to help your body rest. How can we understand this better?
It doesn't replace sleep. It's restful in a sense of how efficient your body is at using the oxygen that's on its red blood cells. So that's the like physiologic measure that they look at, which may or may not make sense to people who aren't medical, but that's like a thing that you can measure. Like, am I efficient with the oxygen that I already have? It is restful, not like in the same way sleep is necessarily restful, but it's restful in a different way, that it's like putting your body into a relaxed state. Now, when we are sleeping, and this is how I have been taught to understand it, when we are sleeping, our body wants to heal from all these stresses that we carry around with us that I've already talked about. And so when we're sleeping, our body tries to use that amount of rest to get rid of some of these stresses. So that ends up keeping us awake, because our body's kind of like, that process of healing is physiologic activity. You're not like up and dancing or moving around, but it's like keeps your body more like at a more surface level of sleep or activity. So now we're kind of hijacking, and I'm feeling like the word hijacking I don't love anymore, but we're kind of like taking over our sleep, which is designed to rest our brains. We're taking that over to remove stress from our body, so we don't end up getting that rest of our mind, because we're more awake than we would want to be. So when we're doing this meditation practice, we're using that time to remove these stresses from our body.
Oh,
a deeply relaxing state, but that's actually, it's not just our minds, it's our body also that's relaxing. So we're using that time to get rid of the stresses, so that when we are sleeping, we can actually rest the way we're supposed to rest. Also with sleep, because when we're in fight or flight mode all the time, or in stress mode, our body makes chemicals like cortisol and adrenaline that are all designed to keep us awake in an emergency, but they're just flowing through our body all the time. And that keeps us from getting more restful sleep. So if you're trying to go to sleep and your mind is racing and you can't sleep, or you get up to pee in the middle of the night and you can't get back to sleep because your mind is racing, that's from stress chemicals, the cortisol and adrenaline. So if we are shifting our bodies out of that mode 20 minutes twice a day, it starts to like spill out into our waking state as well. We're going to be most likely, or more very often, sleeping better, because we're not I sort of joke that it's like our body's Red Bull. Like, my body, I don't need Red Bull. My body's making it with cortisol and adrenaline. So if I'm like turning off that switch, that's not keeping me awake at night. And then I'm going to get better sleep. So there's a couple different ways that it can help with sleep. And it's also not guaranteed to help everyone sleep perfectly, as as much as they need to, or as much as they want to, but it can be very, very helpful with sleep. And to finally answer your question, it doesn't replace sleep. It can just make sleep work better. And it is like another way for your body to heal itself from stress and trauma.
That is fascinating. It is so fascinating. I'm kind of obsessed with like sleep, and although I try not to look at it, but I wear one of those rings that tells me about REM sleep and light sleep and deep sleep. And like, I don't deep sleep. I just don't. And I'm like, is my brain suffering? Like, what's going on here? So, I mean, I don't know, and maybe I should just take the ring off and not worry about it.
I'm actually, it's funny you mentioned that, because I've been a little bit curious about it, because I feel like it gives some helpful information, but I feel like I would get it and then get tired of it after a couple of weeks. I got one of those posture corrector things that were like, it buzzes when you're slouching, and then you have to, it's not a physical posture corrector, but it measures your posture. And when you're slouching, it buzzes you. So you sit up. And I got real tired of that real fast. So I feel like the ring may not be helpful for me, but or may not be helpful in the way I would want it to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to have that data, because a lot of my meditation students who have Apple Watches, like, it'll start beeping at them in the middle of their meditations, because it's like, are you sleeping now? Like, what's going on? Why did your heart rate drop? Why is your respiratory rate drop? Like, what's going, like, it even things like the ring and the watch can sense that there's a shift happening in your body. And we don't want to do the meditation for that, but we don't want to get too obsessed with like, how's my heart rate in that meditation? And how's my heart rate in that one? But it's really cool to see kind of verification that, yes, I am going somewhere when I'm meditating. Because it sounds like impossible to achieve this fourth state of consciousness. It's actually super easy. And everybody I teach is able to do that, like, no problem. But it doesn't feel like it's humanly attainable, because it just feels like, well, I'm the only one that's not going to be able to do that. So for people who are skeptical or self-doubty, which we all are to some extent, it's nice to have sometimes like a measure that says, oh yeah, your heart rate dropped 20 points during those 20 minutes. Like, okay, something happened. I did go somewhere, even though I might not have realized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So I will put your information in the show notes in case anyone is interested in any of your courses.
Yeah, jillwener.com. It's got all my meditation stuff on there, tapping, anti-racism, and then the anti-racism will lead you to, we have our own conscious anti-racism website, but most of that information's on my site too. So all of it's on there. For healthcare people, the online meditation course is accredited for continuing education. So for doctors and nurses and PAs and PTs and OTs and pretty much many allied health professionals can get continuing education credit for taking the online meditation course, which is really cool.
That's so really, really cool. Yeah.
Use their CME money to pay for that.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on and talking. This was so much more than what I expected it to be, especially when you talked about trauma and anti-racism. I just really want to thank you. And wow, it's pretty exciting to see, for one, that we don't have to be afraid to be pigeonholed in one profession. I think we can be guided into other things. And I think that's a lot different than the way a lot of us were raised,
Right.
And so that's encouraging. But thank you so much for coming on today.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I really love how Jill talked about taking the guru culty stuff out and how we really actually get ourselves into a fourth state of consciousness to actually clear trauma from our body. And I had no idea that past trauma actually lived in our cells. There's so many nuggets in this episode that I myself am going to go back and listen again, and I hope you do too. And as always, if this episode helped you and you think that it can help any of your loved ones or friends, please go ahead and share it with them. And as always, we will be back next Tuesday with a new episode on the Air Hug Community Podcast.